I am at least. You guys probably not, because you tend to, the way we do our business, you tend to be about 2 weeks behind where I am, because I need to be ahead of you guys to make sure we're prepared. So, I want to talk about aspects of emotion today. This is our second lecture on emotions, and really just a small look at emotion. There's a lot more to it, obviously, because we have a course. It's called Psych of Emotion. And here at Ohio State Psychology, we believe the two, motivation and emotion, are so important that they each deserve their own course, right? Which is kind of unusual. Most schools will give you a course that's motivation and emotion. And differentiating the two can be difficult. So let's talk about the three central aspects. Oh, wait, see the picture? I call this picture Boots Babies. So I brought Boots in as a stray. She was pretty pregnant. I brought her in, put her in our quarantine room, our extra bedroom, kept her in there, and lo and behold, after a couple weeks, Boots raised us with six kittens, six super healthy kittens, and they're all adopted by one person. One of my colleagues at Columbus State back in the day has a farm, and she said, I will take all six kittens. So there they are, living their life on the farm. Little popular farm. Doesn't get much better than that. Three central aspects of emotion: the biological, the cognitive, and the sociocultural. So you can see we're kind of taking a different approach to the understanding of emotion in this lecture. Let's hope so. Why would we be taking the lecture otherwise? So the biological, cognitive aspects of emotion. Well, the biological aspects, parts of us that are associated with emotion on a physiological level, is our autonomic nervous system. And that can be simply divided into parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Remember, the parasympathetic is largely calming it down. Sympathetic is largely activating. The endocrine system, so hormones that are involved in emotion, and many are. Cortisol is one of the heavy hitters in that regard. The neural brain circuitry, and boy, for our neuroscience majors, thank you so much for exploring these concepts and kind of paving the way. The rate of neural firing is, according to some emotional theorists, very important to the experience of emotion. Slow firing, fast firing, and then facial feedback. And isn't it interesting that for emotion, often some subset of emotion researchers really talk about the bodily involvement with emotion. And one of the terms is proprioception, and that is the ability to understand the state of our body. Facial feedback is one example of this, so we'll get to that as well. So neural activation is the neural firing is the pattern of electrocortical activity in the brain at any time. And this is one of the early areas of neural research, right? Because it can be done with the EEG, and that is look at firing rates in different areas of the brain. So different emotions are activated by different rates of cortical firing, according to these theorists. Now, is this a causal, or is this a result, or is it some kind of bi-directional relationship? There's a lot that can be said, but what we do see is activity increases with surprise, fear, and interest. So the neural rate of firing increases during these emotions typically. Anger activity remains constant as with distress, and then finally joy, we see the activity decreasing. Now what we can take away from this, I would be hesitant to speak too much about this, way out of my area in the study and understanding of emotions. Now, the neuroscience of emotion then, one of the brain's emotion systems operates mainly at the unconscious level. And I devoted my dissertation to studying non-conscious emotions. I still believe they exist. I didn't provide good evidence for this, and many people are still attempting. But one of our emotion systems operates at this non-conscious or unconscious level. It relies on deep limbic structures, and we know that the seat of emotion, we often point to the amygdala. The amygdala, when we talk about emotion, is probably fear, aggression, and maybe not a whole lot else. So this is still a wide open area for exploration. The other system involves conscious processing in the cortex. So run in parallel, or, as some of us suggest, they might in fact produce different results depending on the context. The biological mechanisms at work behind our emotions include the limbic system, which allows for quick automatic responding, the amygdala, the reticular formation. The reticular formation represents the brain stem level of sympathetic nervous system for negative emotions, and the cerebral cortex, which is thought to generate consciousness and experience and higher level processing. Also, and I think more important in this area of the cerebral cortex, is the ability to inhibit emotions, and that is maybe to experience anger but not act on it. Let's take a look, though, at how these systems might operate at the same time. So we've got a real rough diagram of the brain. It is a real rough diagram. We're looking at processing fear. So let us get some sensory receptors going here. We'll put the eyes out at the front of the brain, close to the approximate location, right? And what happens is, let's have a stimulus object. And so we have a snake, and many people are afraid of snakes. So what happens is, we know the electromagnetic energy, the visual spectrum. The electromagnetic energy hits the snake, it reflects off the snake, and the rods and cones transduce that signal into a neural impulse. That is, we assess and measure the electromagnetic energy reflected from the snake, and that information then is converted, transformed, transduced is the proper word, into neural impulses that will travel along the optic nerve. First stop on the optic nerve of importance for us is the visual thalamus. Now, this is a part of the brain in the limbic system, right? And this is non-conscious processing at this point. So the visual thalamus is monitoring signals, right, that are transduced to the eyes. And in this case, the visual thalamus says, whoa, I want to send that information to the amygdala. And the amygdala says, holy shit, that is a snake. We better jump. Get out of the way, somehow react. Now, this process is super fast, but it's non-conscious, right? So the visual thalamus, non-conscious mechanism, processes sense to the amygdala, and the amygdala says, jump the hell out of it. Okay. So, that is the non-conscious, fast, but sometimes suffers from inaccuracy. Maybe this is a plastic string, something used to fool us, but initially, we have that fright response until we can determine the fact that there is not a threat. So note, though, that as the optic nerve takes the signal to the visual thalamus, through the visual thalamus, then it goes back to the visual cortex. Now, the visual cortex is where we'll start to decode the signal and present it to consciousness. So, fast, non-conscious, slower, conscious processing. Learn the motorcycle racing downstairs. Every day that goes by, that goes on all day, all night. So, I just gotta get out of this place. Who's signing this up? We gotta get out of this place. You know what? The animals. So we look forward to summer, to being able to move outside, to be able to open up the windows and enjoy life. But what are we assaulted with? Crap like that. So we go to the visual cortex. So, say, oh my God, snake, jump. But then the conscious processing takes over and it says, oh, wait a second, that's a plastic snake. And look, my friends are over there laughing at me, so I was tricked. Two systems were dual process animals. Non-conscious, quick, fast, immediate responding, right? But prone to inaccuracies. Conscious process, more deliberate, more accurate, but slower, right? So we might have been bitten by the snake by the time we consciously appraised the threat. So, from this point of view, this biological point of view, many people say there are basic emotions. And if we take a biological point of view, then we might generate a list of emotions that we think are innate, hence basic, that everyone experiences.
Okay, so the theory of basic emotions, though, is not just about innate emotions. Many people include basic emotions, emotion theorists, and we got their names going down this column here. So Plutchik, one of the early guys, Arnold, we'll talk about Arnold a little later. Ekman, I'm going to talk about in just a moment or two. Gray, Izar, James, we'll talk about all these guys. They have different lists of basic emotions. And you say, well, how is this possible? Isn't this science? Well, it's psychological science, and psychologists tend to disagree. So what one psychologist calls a basic emotion might not be on the list of another psychologist. So what's important is not just the list of basic emotions offered by a given emotion theorist, but their reason for calling it a basic emotion. So if we take Arnold, for example, he says your basic emotions, well, anger, aversion, courage, dejection, desire, despair, fear, hate, hope, love, sadness. And then you sit down and you say, okay, Arnold, tell me, why did you include those on your list as basic emotions? And he says, well, they're related to action tendencies. So all these imply an action. And when we talk action tendencies, right, we have approach, avoid, or remain stationary as essentially the three possibilities. Ekman, Friese, and Ellsworth say, no. Basic emotions, anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, surprise. Why? Because these are universal facial expressions. And I think that's where we should go now with Paul Ekman. Oh, well, let's go down to James just before we get off this slide, right? Fear, grief, love, rage, got 4 of them, that's it. Bodily involvement. Let's get back to that just a little bit. Oh, I guess we should mention Tompkins. I keep saying I'm done. I'm just trying to trick you guys, right? Tompkins, this is the rate of neural firing. So the density of neural firing, as we saw in that neural firing map earlier in the lecture. Here's Paul Ekman. So, hey, what's going on, Paul? And his is about universal facial expressions. He's probably the most well-known of all the emotion theorists. Like in Psych 1100, you probably were introduced to Paul Ekman. If you watched the show Lie to Me, which was on several years ago now, it was about Ekman's theories and research. So, Ekman's 6 basic emotions, what were they? Let me see if you can guess. So as you look at this, you say, okay, what is this emotional expression? What is this emotional expression? What is this emotional expression? And so on through all 6. Now why are there 6 here? Because Ekman, how did he come to this? He said it's a universal emotion. I mean, it's a basic emotion. If I can take these pictures to any place on the planet, any culture, and show people and they agree. So this expression here, what is this one? What do you guys think? How many people vote happy? So here's how we establish it as a basic emotion. I take this picture around and I show it to people all over the world, 21 different cultures in all, I believe it was, on his first pass. I say, hey, what emotion is this? And over 92% said that is happiness. So that was kind of his inclusion criteria. If over 90% agree on what this emotion is being portrayed, then we're going to call it a basic emotion. So his inclusion criteria was if people can recognize it across the planet, regardless of culture, then it's a basic emotion. And he came up with 6, right? So what was this one? How many of you are with surprise? And once you get skilled at this, you start looking at the actual different muscles and how they're activated, right? See, eyebrows are raised here, but not here, right? Wrinkles around the eyes here, but not here. It's stretched out. Mouth has upturned corners. This one does not. Fear, okay, we see similarities to surprise, but dissimilarities exist as well to differentiate the two. Okay, well, what do you think here? What's this young man portraying? That would be anger, right? And notice the pursed lips, right, is one of the indicators there. This one, what do you think? This is one of my favorites. It's one of the easiest ones to understand. It's disgust, right? And notice how the nose is wrinkled up and someone actually rocks back with disgust, right? Why? Because I want to close access. Imagine a dirty diaper, a diaper that should have been changed hours ago. And you say, come here, little baby, let me change your diaper. And you open that up and you, oh my God, right? It's a fascinating way to look at this. And this last one here, sadness, okay? So, Ekman's 6 basic emotions. But here's the deal with science, and this is one of the reasons I love science. Because Ekman does all these conferences, he writes all these papers, he shows us all the people, and people then provide him feedback, and they ask him questions. And then they say, you know, have you ever considered such and such? Have you ever considered such and such? Have you ever considered such and such as a basic emotion? So, based on further research, Ekman later adds a 7th basic emotion to his 6. And that's the beauty of science, because when we find out new things, we can incorporate them into our existing findings. What is this one? What do you think? Let me create a little context around it. Let's suppose we're at a bar, and I see this woman across the bar, and I walk over there and I say, hey, how about I buy you a drink? This is the facial expression she displays. How am I doing, guys? What do you think? Yeah, I'm not doing too well. I look at that expression and go, okay, I'm sorry to bother you. You know, I hope you have a great evening. That's contempt. So that's the 7th basic emotion. Contempt's an interesting emotion. Notice the asymmetry. So one corner of the mouth raises, and that's pretty fascinating. So contempt is one of the few asymmetric facial expressions. Now, from this, how do we come to understand this? Well, Ekman and others have developed what's called the facial action coding system. And this manual is used to train laboratory assistants, to train researchers on the underlying musculature that causes the shifts in the face to create these expressions. So this explains how to categorize facial behaviors based on the muscles that produce the system. So many of us just do this automatically. We've just learned over time that this combination of facial structure and the underlying musculature signals that it is this emotion. But if we want to go deeper, we can actually learn the mechanics of it and become more consistent in our evaluation of facial expressions. There's a huge number of muscles in the face. Understanding how they move the face then makes us better at assessing facial expressions and then surmising the underlying emotions. This is a feature of emotional intelligence, is the ability to read facial expressions. Now, where it gets really tricky is what if, and remember I mentioned the show Lie to Me? Well, let's combine that with the idea of conscious versus non-conscious. Remember, non-conscious is fast, conscious is slower. So, you might say something to me that offends me, and immediately, non-consciously, my immediate reaction is to move my face in perhaps an anger expression. But all of a sudden I realize in this 1/10 of a second that you are my boss and I better not display anger because there'll be hell to pay if I do. So I want to mask that facial expression. So what happens is the non-conscious drives the musculature slightly, but within a 1/10 of a second, my conscious control takes over and masks the expression. But it's in that fleeting 1/10 of a second. It's what's known as a micro-expression. And some of us seem to be more adept at monitoring faces and being able to read these micro-expressions and thus become better deception detectors because we can tell that an emotion was erupting, but it's being masked. Now, for many of us, we do this outside of our awareness. We've just learned to do it from experience. But the point is that people can be trained to do this, right? But what if 6 or 7 isn't really enough to capture it? What if Ekman isn't quite there? Researchers at Ohio State have found a way for computers, check this out, found a way for computers to recognize 21 distinct facial expressions based on this facial action coding, right? You train the computer to look for these subtle changes in the musculature, right? Even expressions for complex or seemingly contradictory emotions. So we move beyond the basics to complex, compound emotions. The study gives cognitive scientists more tools to study the origins of emotion in the brain, part of the benefit. Here's a study of a participant that makes 3 faces, happy, right? And what's the middle one? We had an example of that previously. So happy and disgust are the basic emotions. But what if we instruct someone, hey, I want you to be happily disgusted. Now that's 2 strange emotions to combine, but you can see where that might be there's a joke that's been played on someone, or you're the recipient of this joke that generates, the funny part, the happy part, but then it's based, the context is disgust, right? So you get this happy disgust emotion combination. Now, Alex Martinez, right, here at Ohio State, is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical Computer Engineering. You go, what? And he's the founder and the director of the Computational Biology and Cognitive Science Lab. And basically, think about what's going on here. Is it possible that we can teach computers to read emotional expressions? And Dr. Martinez is doing this in his laboratory. So think about artificial intelligence, but think about computers interacting with you. It's one thing to say, Alexa, hey, play Grateful Dead Truckin', right? And Alexa says, oh yeah, I'll play Grateful Dead Truckin', and she puts the music on for you, right? But what if you sit down to your computer in the morning, and your computer now is interacting with you in this crazy way and says, God, Mark, you look a little down today. Would you like to hear something uplifting? That is the potential for computers to read our facial expressions and then alter the content that we're fed, right, as a result of our facial expressions. I don't know whether that's a good, bad thing. I'll leave that to you guys to decide. But it is coming to be within the realm of possibilities, right? So consider this, right? So we've gone beyond facial expressions for simple emotions like happy or sad. We found a strong consistency in how people move their facial muscles to express 21 categories of emotions, said Martinez. So that is simply stunning. This tells us that these 21 emotions are expressed in the same way by nearly everyone, at least in our culture. Now notice, he's making this cultural specific. Ekman was looking across cultures. Martinez is looking within culture. But this is a fascinating idea that, in fact, we have available to us kind of 21 compound emotions, or basic emotions, if you will, and they could be universally within a culture recognized, expressed, have the same meaning. So this really is about the future, and it's pretty crazy to think about. Questions about that? Okay. Okay, from biologically, physiologically based theories, we move to cognitively based theories. And here is a beautiful kind of culmination of research on cognitively based emotional experience. Now, what we look at here is the Circumplex Model. And I love the Circumplex Model. I mean, it's pretty to look at it, if nothing else. We can start there. But what we see then is, first of all, let's pick out the basic emotions that are inspired by the Circumplex Model. And the basic emotions ride in this central ring here. So disgust, anger, sadness, surprise, fear, joy. That's Ekman's 6 basic emotions, right? But note, there's 2 more. There's 8 basic emotions according to the Circumplex Model. And that would be then anticipation and trust. Wow. Now, the reasons for inclusion are going to be different than for the physiologically or biologically based measures. The Circumplex Model allows for a couple aspects of emotional theory here, and we're going to toy with one of these in our homework assignment. The circumplex model, if we have anger, for example, as a basic emotion, notice that as we move inward, it intensifies. So anger can become rage, a more intense form of anger. But anger light, if you will, might be described as annoyance. So one feature of the circumplex model is it allows for the expression of changes in intensity of emotion. But the second component then is also it allows for complex combined emotions. So if we take, for example, anger and disgust, blend them, if they're experienced at the same time, then the resultant emotion is best described as the complex emotion contempt. Now, Ekman said that's a basic emotion. In this case, the circumplex model says no, it's a complex emotion. Emotion theorists do not agree. So let's get that under our belt right now. But if we go back to that woman in the bar, the example I used in the previously in the lecture, what we see then is I go up to this woman and I ask her, hey, can I buy you a drink? And she's like, look at me, get away from me, you troll. I can't believe, I'm so pissed off that you even thought you were in my league, that you could ask me that question. So the anger and the disgust combined to demonstrate her expression of contempt according to the circumplex model, right? So if we're surprised at someone's behavior, right, and it saddens us, then we might then be experiencing disapproval. So the circumplex model really allows for broad range of emotional, but notice a lot of what I'm talking about is cognitively based. I talked about this woman's reaction. She's assessing the situation and it leads her to contempt. Or I'm surprised at someone's behavior and it saddens me. So doing the work, doing the cognitive effort, it yields disapproval. So you can see where this model is a little different than seeing a snake and reacting, which could be a biological, that could be a genetic legacy, right, that would kind of hardwired for fear of snakes. This really implies that emotion is the result of assessing a situation, what it means to us in the context. Thus, it's more cognitively based. It requires more thought. Well, this is homework 7, part 3. I know. I did up the homework assignment in one order and then fit it to the lecture, so it's going to bounce around a little bit, but you guys will survive it, I'm sure. So if you choose to do part 3 of the homework, 7. Many of us are fascinated with the circumplex model. Let's move from fascination to application and analysis. And remember when we talked about Bloom's taxonomy earlier in the course, Bloom would be proud of us because we don't want to just know it, right, and understand it. We want to go the higher level steps of actually being able to apply it and analyze it. So in this, I want you to create, whoever chooses to do this, I want you to create a scenario that yields a complex emotion described in the circumplex model. Describe the antecedent conditions or the expectations. So I'll give you an example here. This is a true example. My nephew is living with us under the deal that if he went to Columbus State Community College and maintained a B average, we would support him. So he's living in our house, right? And I'm like, all you got to do is go to college full time. You maintain a B average. I'll take care of your expenses. I'll buy your food. He smoked. I'll buy your cigarettes. I don't care. I just want you to get through school. I want you to find yourself. So here's your deal. How many of you would like that deal? How many of you would be willing to work hard to attain a B average and I would support your ass? I thought it was a pretty appealing deal. Maybe I was wrong. But during Christmas, then, he went home to Portland, Oregon, where his mom lives, right? My wife's sister, for Christmas break. About 2 days before he's due back to Columbus to start the spring semester, his mom called me and asked, hey, have you heard from your nephew? And I replied, no, I haven't heard from him. You know, I just figured he was having a good time seeing all his friends back in Portland or whatever. His mom said he said he's not coming back. And I'm like, what? He's not coming back? I thought we were doing really well. And she reported, well, he got 2 Fs and a C. That's not quite a B average, you know, no matter how you compute it. And so he assumed that the deal was off. He didn't want to go to school anymore and he wasn't coming back. Now, I would have taken him back
he could have gone back to school and improved on his work, right? But that's not what he wanted to do, obviously, right? Upon reflection, you know, I experienced the complex emotion disapproval. I said, oh man, that really sucks. I don't support that at all. Upon reflection, I could see, though, that I was surprised because I thought he was doing okay, right? And I was saddened because he wasn't coming back and he was deciding not to go to school. So I got surprise, I got sadness, boom, disapproval, I disapproved his decision, right? And that's how it works. So I want you to go ahead, any one of you, figure it out, craft a scenario that demonstrates the two basics combining to create a complex emotion, right? And I would prefer that you do not use disapproval, because that's the one I used in my example. If you must, you must, but I would prefer that you pick on a different one. So, can you apply it according to Bloom's taxonomy? Now that you've gotten A done, a question for you. How does intensity figure into this? And I don't know. I mean, suppose I was pensive and distracted, right? And let's go back to the model, right? So now I'm distracted and pensive. Does that equal disapproval? Or does it have to be at this level of intensity, sadness, and surprise? So I want you to conjecture upon that. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that. Would I've experienced disapproval? Two answers are needed here. First, would I've experienced disapproval? Yes or no, right? But then, of course, I want your explanation, and that's really kind of your thoughts on intensity. Excuse me while I settle this dispute between Quincy and Terrence. Go away, you guys. Go do something. Got the windows open up here, and they got the smell of spring in their nostrils, and they're just being crazy. So let us approach then another emotion theorist and approach the second part of the potential homework assignment. Differential emotions theory. What do we know? Different emotions, 10 emotions, constitute the principal motivation system for human beings. Now, there's a very explicit tie-in from emotion to motivation, you know. I've been trying to be explicit about that, but in some cases we've been kind of implying it rather than expressing it directly. Well, in this case we see Izzard is going to be straight up about it. 2. In the differential emotion theory, the second kind of theoretical pillar is each emotion has its unique subjective phenomenological quality. So each emotion, to say it as simply as possible, feels differently, right? 3, unique expression. Each emotion has its own facial expressive pattern. Well, we know that that's a lot more than just 10, but DET, we're looking at this theory. Unique neural activity. Each emotion has its own specific rate of neural firing that activates it. Okay? Notice that this is kind of a theory that's incorporating a lot of different elements of what's already understood. And then 5, unique purpose or motivation. Each emotion generates distinctive motivational property and serves an adaptive function. So, we can see that there's a strong genetic legacy. Anytime you hear the word adaptation in this context, what they're saying is this is for adapting to unique situations. This provides evolutionary advantage. Remember what Darwin said. Darwin never said, hey, survival of the fittest. He said survival of those who are the most adaptable. Right, and that really is the process of natural selection. Natural selection implies that the environment changes, and the environment is continuously changing. To the extent that you can adapt to those changes in the environment, you'll be successful. To the extent that you cannot adapt, then you will be unsuccessful over time. So, Izzard's 10 fundamental emotions included in his differential emotions theory. Let's look at what Izzard's saying. Well, and he uses the positive, neutral, and negative categories. Again, some emotion researchers warm up to these. Other emotion researchers don't like the positive, negative evaluation. Positive emotions, interest and joy. Neutral emotions, surprise. And that's kind of cool to consider, right? And then negative emotions. And notice, we have a lot more negative emotions, don't we? then we do positive. And most people would agree on that. Fear, anger, disgust, distress, contempt, shame, and guilt. So shame and guilt are kind of, and interest are the ones that are coming to us as new from, let's say, Ekman's 7. So if we look at the differential emotions theory arrayed across 2 dimensions, right? Well, the arousal pleasantness. So here we have excited and pleasant, neutral and pleasant, calm and pleasant, right? So that would be essentially the 3 possibilities. Then we have excited unpleasant, neutral unpleasant, calm unpleasant. Then we have excited neutral, we have calm neutral, and the number of emotions that fall under these and the emotion examples. It's an interesting theory because what we're saying is the level of arousal, one aspect, and the pleasantness of that, the assessed pleasantness or unpleasantness, yields these possible combinations. And what he's done is, hey, how many emotions really depict excited and pleasant? And he's going to say 27. Euphoric is an example. Okay? But there's 26 others there as well. An interesting question, I think it's interesting, that I like to ask in Psych of Emotion repeatedly is it an emotion? And when we talk about anything that we might call an emotion. But also the other question that kind of is generated from that is, if there's no word for it, can we feel it? That is, if an emotion label doesn't exist, then can it be felt? And you know, let's leave that one alone because it's probably too distracting a question. But now, DET in the environment, affordances and complexities. So in this case, what we see is, hey, we can label the environment with 4 different kind of labels: boring, chaotic, lively, or calm, right? So what happens then? Well, in a boring environment, right, the environment doesn't provide interesting or useful affordances and is not indicative of safety. So low on affordances, another synonym, rough synonym for affordances is opportunities. Opportunities to engage, opportunities to perform, right? So what we see is in this unpleasant, unactivated environment that's low on affordances, what we see then is low intrinsic motivation. There isn't going on and there's not much interest. But if we move up in an activated but unpleasant, high complexity, we have high extrinsic motivation. It's chaotic. So the environment is operating on us, right? Now, if it's anxiety-free and pleasant, so we're activated, right, and pleasant, high affordances, then it's a lively environment and we have high intrinsic motivation. So think about the environment that you want to be in, that you find pleasant, activating, right? That you want to participate in this environment. Why? Because it's cool and you enjoy it. That would be kind of describing high levels of intrinsic motivation. And then a calm environment, right? Is low complexity, right, but pleasant, low extrinsic motivation. There's not much on the outside that's operating on us. In fact, we're kind of free of outside influences at this point in time. So what are we going to do with this? Oh my God. Well, I want you to create a scenario that would conform to each of the differential emotions theory pi. That was a pi. See, it's a pi. It's round. You know, a couple days ago was pi day. It's not that kind of pi. So pi, 4 segments of the pi. Let's explore it. So create a scenario that would conform to each of the DET's 4 slices of motivational pie. For example, in our lectures meeting, we were talking about boring aspects of our job. Most of us agreed that proctoring exams is the most boring thing we do, right? It's unpleasant and because it requires no activation, right? So when I'm sitting there watching people take a midterm, right, it's unpleasant. It's low on affordances. There's nothing to do. My motivation is low. My intrinsic, oh boy, I really want to go proctor this exam. Not. Right? So, create a scenario that kind of captures that. It's typified by low intrinsic motivation. Yes, I know I need to do it. Intrinsically, I know I need to do it. No, I'm not being forced to proctor the exam. I'm not operating under extrinsic motivation. I'm operating under a very low level of intrinsic motivation. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And I'm intrinsically motivated to do it. But I do it simply because it's part of what I do. The reward value is absent, right? But the punishment isn't there either. So it's really not an extrinsic phenomenon. It's an intrinsic phenomenon. Thus, the low motivation, albeit intrinsic motivation. Don't forget to mention the role of affordance or complexity. And I'm afforded nothing, right? So, what are you going to do with this one then? If you take on part 4, or if you want to share part 4, again, up to you guys. Give me a chaotic example scenario, a boring example scenario, a calm example scenario, and a lively example scenario, and fit in all the components. So basically, all of these points need to be discussed in each of the 4 examples. Questions? All right then. Let us move on to facial feedback hypothesis. Okay, so we have then an internal or external event, and notice this can be something that we remember. Remember, you can something that's sad, a sad memory pops to mind, right? That causes an emotional state. So the stimulus was internal, or it could be receiving a surprise in the mail, a pleasant surprise, right? Which would be an external event. That changes the rate of neural firing, right? The limbic system, the hypothalamus, basal ganglia are all activated. The impulses generate motor cortex sent to the face. The facial nerve, the cranial nerve, right, activate. The facial action, we see changes in the musculature, changes in the rempertor, and changes in the facial glands, right? From the trigeminal nerve to the cranial nerve, receipt of the facial action in the sensory cortex, and cortical integration of the facial feedback. So, the facial expression is generated, but it's also then monitored, and the success, I guess, if you will, or the failure of generating the facial expression comes back to be assessed by the brain. So it is a circular process, right? Now, Strack, Martin, and Strepper did this study, and what they did is they asked participants then, they were randomly assigned to either hold a pen in their mouth this way, or randomly assigned to hold a pen in their mouth that way. Then they did some other activities in the lab. They were then given a mood measure to see what kind of mood they were in. And wouldn't you know, people who were assigned to this condition reported a relatively negative, sad mood. These people a relatively positive, happy mood. Note, though, by holding the pen in this way, it activated the muscles that are associated with frowning. The facial feedback, then, causes the brain to believe that, in fact, sadness is occurring and happiness occurring in this example. Wow. So, emotion is not just something that happens here, but emotion also happens in the body. And this is emotional embodiment, which is a very difficult concept. I still struggle with understanding it. But that emotions exist throughout the body, essentially, or precursors to emotion, and the expression of emotion occurs throughout the body, and we monitor the body. That process of monitoring body position is called proprioception, right? So it's the whole package. It's a very complete system. It's not a one-direction system. It's a multiple direction system. And this then causes me to be curious about or consider, what about Botox? So participants given Botox injections read sad sections of a story more slowly than the control condition participants. The study demonstrates the peripheral feedback affects cognitive processing. So that is, when it's sad, right, I'm probably going to read it and be moved and perhaps wrinkle my forehead. But what happens now if I'm reading sad material, cognitively processing sad, but proprioceptively I'm not getting the physical reinforcement of sadness because the Botox has frozen my muscles, right? Then that causes this conflict, which causes me to read more slowly. Wow. Emotion is wide open turf, guys. If you want to research, like in the wild, wild west, right? In the wide open world, emotion is one place to do it. Right, Annika? So, cognitive aspects of emotion then? What do we know? Well, we talked about what does this mean to me previously, and the appraisal theories of emotion really then think about, hey, I'm encountering the stimulus object. Now it can be internal or external, and then I start asking the questions. I process it cognitively. What does this mean to me? Right, sweetie? What does this mean to me? Let me, your nose there. Oh, now are you angry? Okay. So an appraisal is the estimate of the personal significance. What does this mean to me? How does it affect me? Right? The central construct in cognitive understanding of emotion is that term appraisal. So let us not move forward unless you understand what this means. Right? So appraisal is saying, what is the value? What does this mean? How does this impact? How does this affect me? And notice, this is a thoughtful, it is a cognitive process. So, first then, implied by this, without an antecedent cognitive appraisal for the event, emotions don't occur. You say, wait a second. You mean I have to think before I can feel? And according to these folks, basically that's what they're saying. If there's no cognitive appraisal, no thoughtful analysis or evaluation of what this means, then an emotion is not going to result. Can you think of any examples where there might be an emotion that has occurred and no thought process took place first? I mean, I've already demonstrated one. I thought the snake example was pretty good in that regard. But some people might say, well, no, there was an appraisal. It just happened really quickly. It's like, oh, boy, I don't know. So the appraisal, not the event, causes the emotion. Now that could explain, though, why people have different emotional responses to the same stimulus. Because its meaning to them is different, so they evaluate it differently, and then that stimulus, the same stimulus, can yield different responses. Boy, this is getting sticky, right? Oh no, what are we going to do with that? So the appraisal theory of emotion, 3 questions. How does the perception of an object or event produce a good or bad appraisal? How does the appraisal generate emotion? And how does felt emotional expression express itself in action? So let's take a situation, a life event, right? The appraisal. Is this good or bad? Or another way to look at it, is this beneficial for me, the organism, or is it potentially harmful for me, the organism? This then yields the emotion of, the simple emotion of liking or disliking. So the kind of these baseline, either I like it or dislike it, and then the action implied is if I like it, I will approach it. If I dislike it, I will withdraw. Problems with this, though. There's a lot of problems with this, and I hope. Let me just jump ahead. I hope by the end of this lecture that you say, "Wow, there's a lot of different emotion theories, and they're probably all correct within their context." Wow. All right. So let's look then. What do we have? Lazarus complex appraisals. Definitely super cognitive approach to emotional experience. The cognitive process, right, is that intervene between important life events and physiological and behavioral reactivity. So before the physiology changes, before the actions take place, it was the thoughts that drove that. So he lists the appraisals as 3 categories or 3 types of appraisal, if you will. Type of benefit, type of harm, or type of threat. And then he gives examples that tie to specific emotions. So making progress towards a goal is going to yield the emotion happiness. So I say, oh my God, I got that done. I'm making progress towards my goal. I'm happy, right? Taking credit for an achievement would lead to pride. Improving on a distressing condition, pride. Believing a desired outcome is possible, hope. And these are well supported in a lot of the studies of these individual emotions. So this is pretty much solid here, right? Let's go down to type of harm. Being demeaned by a personal offense. Well, then I'm going to get angry, right? But if I transgress, if I commit a violation of my morals, a moral imperative, then I'm probably going to experience guilt, right? Taking in an indigestible object or idea. Disgust, and I love that, object or idea. I eat something, and I spit it out, right? Disgust. Or I consider an idea and I go, I can't believe you even think like that, right? It would be disgust, or that somebody else thinks like that. And then type of threat, let's do a couple of these. Facing an uncertain, unspecific threat, anxiety, and that's truly the definition of anxiety. Let's look at fright, facing immediate, overwhelming danger that's identifiable. And then envy and jealousy, wanting what someone else has. We're experiencing envy. But if we want something that someone else has and they're having it prevents me from having it, then that would morph into jealousy. There's a very interesting article, I can't remember who wrote it now, differentiating envy and jealousy. Fascinating stuff. So, homework 7, part 2 then. What are we looking at, guys? Well, for this assignment, you're tasked with the completion of the Lazarus complex appraisal model. The third column, I see 2 columns. Where the hell is the third column? Well, I'm going to have you create the third column. Consider Lassa's complex appraisal model. Once a situation, life event has been praised, it's classified as benefit, harm, or threat. We got that covered, right? We need to complete the process by describing the motivation generated. Because emotions are for doing. Emotions are linked to motivations. So now, what we have is, I've taken the table from that previous slide and I've recreated it in Excel for you guys in your homework, so you're going to need to fill this in, right? So I'm going to say type of benefit. It's a benefit, right? Appreciation of an altruistic gift. Someone gave me a gift with no strings attached. It leads to the emotion gratitude, but what does that motivate me to do? So someone gave me something, and they say, hey, here you go. No strings attached. And I say, oh my God, thank you so much. What does it motivate me to do? Let's explore this. I'm going to say it motivates me to reciprocate it. It motivates me to do likewise for the person who did it for me. Okay? So you don't need to fill that one in because I already got it filled in as an example. All right, I noticed it shut off while I was doing this. So let's just look at the overview. What you have then is the benefits. You have the emotions associated with the benefits. You have the harms, the emotion associated with the harms. That was all Izzard's stuff. Remember, all I'm asking you to do then is to fill in the motivation that is generated. So I want to do this last one here. Wanting what someone else has. It makes me envious. What might that motivate me to do? Envy? God, look at what they've got. Boy, I sure envy. I wish I had that. Well, the motivational property then is to improve myself to the point where then I can get that. Okay? So I want you to take it a step further. I'm going to say that Izzard, not really, but let's say that Izzard left us incomplete. He didn't close the loop. He didn't supply us the motivation. We're going to supply the motivation. So that's where we're going with that. Now, what do we have then? Please complete that third column. I provided 3 examples in the table. Once you've filled out the table in its entirety, all these spots are now filled in. What I want you to do then is now pick one from each appraisal category. So that's only 3. There was 3 appraisal categories: benefit, harm, threat, right? And pick one from each and explain your rationale for suggesting that motivation. So I don't want you to do this for the whole table. I think that would be excessive for this homework assignment. But I want you to pick one from each of the 3 categories. So for example, on the table, appreciating an altruistic gift leads to gratitude. I then filled in column 3 with reciprocation, as we discussed. My explained rationale is that receiving an altruistic gift leads to gratitude, which causes me to want to do something altruistic in return. So note, that is my explanation. This is, each explanation is like a short paragraph, really, kind of at most. So, here's my explanation. List the relationship so it's clear to who grades. I don't remember whether the course assistant is grading it or I am, so I don't know if this is on Logan or me, but regardless, I want you to be ultra clear so we can speed through grading your assignments. My partner surprised me by doing household chores while I was overwhelmed with a difficult assignment. I was so thankful, and that's gratitude, that I felt compelled to reciprocate the kind act, altruism, by taking my partner on an outing they had been yearning to do for quite a while. Okay? So craft this very simple scenario, but start it off super quick, right? Appreciating an altruistic gift is from the table, gratitude is from the table, reciprocation is from the table, and then put it into that short paragraph of a story. Questions about that? Alrighty. Then, let us look further at the appraisal models of emotion. These are very popular models, especially with cognitive psychologists, as you might understand. Appraisal model of emotion. We have a stimulus event. The primary appraisal is personally relevant, because if it's not personally relevant, it probably has no impact whatsoever, right? Now, is it potentially harmful or possibly useful? And these are questions that really get at the core of adaptive behavior. So this is really super low-level appraisals, kind of our genetic legacy. Hey, is that good? Like, can I eat it? Or is that bad? Is it coming to eat me? Right? Is the most basic of appraisals and kind of an adaptability survivable. So, no autonomic nervous system arousal, no coping required, no emotional reaction, right? If it's no, right? Now, if, right, then the stimulus event does have the potential to be harmful or useful, the autonomic nervous system is activated, and from that, approach or avoidance based on the appraisal. So harmful, what we're going to see is kind of a negative activation. Useful, positive activation. That's based on the primary appraisal. The secondary appraisal then is coping resources. Can I successfully deal with this? That is either catch the prey that's running away from me, that would be beneficial, or escape the creature that's going to attack me. Successful coping, then my autonomic nervous system is going to bring me back down to stasis, right, and the emotional reaction ends. But if the secondary appraisal says, holy shit, that thing is getting closer, it's going to eat me, or oh my god, I've been running after this antelope for 6 hours and I can't go on, right? The autonomic nervous system remains activated, and that's how we begin to experience stress or anxiety. Note that emotional states, many of us theorize that emotions are for doing, and once we get it done, we're allowed to return to normal. But if we're in a situation where we can't get it done, and we keep, then that leads to stress and anxiety. Questions about that? Well, then, let us look then. The outcome, happiness if the outcome is positive. This is the primary appraisal. Outcome, sadness if the outcome is negative. Right? What do we know? Well, the secondary appraisal, pride, internal cause. Hey, look, I'm happy that that happened, and I made it happen. My perceived locus of causality in relation to this event, I did it, right? So and then feel pride. But let's suppose it gets done, I'm happy, but someone did it for me. Then it's an expression of gratitude. And it's an external cause. I'm grateful because the external being, actor, etc., did it for me. And then finally, if the stable cause, then it would be attributable to hope. Now on the negative, right, if it was an external cause that caused this to happen and it was negative and it's controllable, then I'll likely experience anger. Sadness, if it's an external uncontrollable, pity, internal controllable guilt, internal uncontrollable shame. So now we've tied it all together. Notice this is the attributional model, so we're attributing the source of the cause to either be external to us or internal, and that explains how the emotions are differentiated in that secondary appraisal. Okay. What are the major camps then? Well, the psychological theories of emotion, James Lange theory. You probably got this in Psych 1100. We'll talk about it for just a moment. An emotion-provoking stimulus produces a physical response that in turn produces an emotion. And this is William James, first and foremost. In his book, Principles of Psychology, the 2-volume work he wrote in 1890, there is a chapter on emotions, right? And James is very specific. He says, look, there's a stimulus. We physically react to that stimulus, and then we label the reaction. We provide a reason for the reaction. So, I see a bear, I run, and therefore I determine I'm afraid. Notice James really flipped the world on its head. He says that the stimulus inspires the physical reaction, which is then explained in terms of an emotion. So what happens? Physical first, thinking second, right? Cannon-Bard theory, an emotional feeling and the internal physiological response actually occur at the same time. So it's two separate paths that are activated simultaneously. One isn't the cause of the other. Both are the result of the cognitive appraisal of the situation. And I'm going to have a diagram here in just a minute. Now, the two-factor theory of emotion came to us from Schachter and Singer, right? The two-factor theory says the emotion is the result of the cognitive appraisal of the physiological arousal. So I have a change in my arousal pattern, right? And I want to understand what that means, so I do a cognitive appraisal, and I look around me to see what's potentially the source of that change, and that is my cognitive interpretation of the emotion-provoking stimulus. So, what does it all mean if we pit the three of these together? Let's take our friend the snake, right? We have a snake, a stimulus of a snake. The physiological arousal is trembling and increased heart rate, and then I am led, according to William James, to the emotion fear. So fear is the result of the analysis of the physiological response. Now, Cannon-Bard say, oh, no, it's not like that. There's a snake, and you say, oh my God, snakes scare me, and I'm aroused as a result of that. Right? So these two occurred simultaneously, but this one didn't cause this, and this didn't cause this. They're both caused by the snake. And then finally, the two-factor theory says, okay, I see the snake, the stimulus snake, the physiological response is trembling, the cognitive appraisal is, wow, I feel afraid, and then the emotion resultant is fear. And we say, well, these guys fought it out. There's been a lot of argument, a lot of debate about these. And they fight it out, and people argue. And some of us just step back and say, you know, there's really no need to argue, because these are all possible. Change the context around, and you can get one that's a better explanation. In a different context or a different set of observations, you might see a different observation, right? So, what do you think? What's your favorite? You're good with all of them, aren't you? You know it depends. Remember the best word in the world? Depends. The only problem with using the word depends, especially if you use it around me, is I'm going to say depends on what, but depends. Okay? So, depends shows cognitive flexibility. It says, well, you know, it could be this way or it could be that way. It depends. It depends on, I need more information. So let's talk some more. Depends opens the doors to conversation. Now, two models then. What comes first, emotion or thinking? That's emotion or cognition primacy. Which comes first? Which is primary? Well, the appraisal theorists, the cognitive people say, hey, duh, right? We see a stimuli, we think about it, and then that generates our emotional experience. But the affective primacy, that is the emotion first people, say, no. We see a stimuli, we have an emotional response, and then we think about it. Well, here's the deal. Which is right? Which is correct? They both are. and they can both be linked together, right? So we can think about it, right? We can see a stimuli, we can think about it, and then, wow, look at that. What do I think of that? I don't know. I don't like that. That doesn't seem fair. Boy, that's not fair. That really pisses me off, right? And then I can think about it some more. And so this isn't, this implies boom, 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 and end of story. No, it's boom, 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 around the circle of life. So it doesn't start and stop anywhere. It's just more of the same. So social and cultural aspects of emotion, well, we can the appraisal contributes to a cognitive understanding of the emotion. Social interaction contributes to social understanding of the emotion, right? And the socio-cultural context one lives in contributes to a cultural understanding of the emotion. So it's not a simple story. Thought and emotion could largely be considered inseparable. Motivation, I think, is... I don't even want to. I was going to say motivation is the result of the emotion, but it could go the other way as well. So there is this interesting relationship that can be bidirectional, tridirectional, cyclical, however you want to put it. Cognition, motivation, and emotion. And I will separate motivation and emotion. I think that's easy enough to do. And emotion and cognition, easy enough to separate. And cognition and motivation can be separate. So we have those three constructs that interact. And the more that we understand those, and the more we understand how they interact, the more we can understand a person's behavior. And the better we can understand a person's behavior, the better we can predict their future behavior. And if we can understand and we can predict, then we can probably shape to a certain extent, for better or for worse, right? And that kind of Machiavellian, being able to manipulate the situation to cause a certain behavior, feeling, or emotion, is inherently manipulative, and then we get to an end justifies the means kind of conversation. So let's leave it at that. Complex phenomenon where cognition, motivation, and emotion are inexorably interlinked, right? So, what do we know then? Let's sum it up. Emotion knowledge, other people and cultures in general instruct us about the causes of our emotions. Emotions are explained through narrative. So notice, a screenwriter, a scriptwriter, an advertiser, lyricists can cause us to feel by the narrative they present us, the story they tell. So we can get swept up in the story, the narrative, and we know how to respond in terms of emotion, right? So we cry at the scene in the movie. We laugh at that statement on the TV show, right? We are enticed to worry about our appearance and thus buy a product from an advertisement. So it's the emotion knowledge that causes these changes. Now, when we get to the other part of this, though, is the expressive part of emotion. The narrative also tells us what we're allowed to express and what we're not allowed to express under certain conditions. And part of this might be then according to rank. So there's certain things, certain emotions that a student can safely direct towards an instructor, but others that they probably cannot safely direct towards an instructor, or an employee to a boss, or a partner to a partner, or a child to a parent, or that these are guided by narratives that we learn from the time we're babies, right? So certain expressions then are best kept to ourselves. That is, they're best masked, as we described earlier in the lecture. And this then becomes the display rules. That maybe we can't demonstrate anger towards our boss. There's a display rule prohibiting that, right? Or men are allowed to express more aggressive emotions where women might be ridiculed for displaying the same emotions. Or the emotion labels, right? If I as a man do something in the workplace and I stand up for myself, then people might walk away and label me as, he's very assertive, He's his own man, right? But at the same time, if a woman does the exact same thing I did within that workplace context, she might be labeled a bitch. Oh God, what a bitch, right? And this is a function of the display rules, and the display rules are primarily gendered, but there are other display rules that are layered on top of that that can be tied to age, ethnicity, position of power, etc. Now, learning the display rules and understanding how the narratives generate emotional response and understanding what's allowable and what isn't allowable in terms of the display rules then makes us more effective emotional managers. So when to control our emotions and what we can display and what we can't, or more so, this is the potential or this is the likely consequence of this emotional display as opposed to this emotional display, and holding off on the emotional display based on an assessment and appraisal of the potential consequences and choosing whether to display that emotion or not. And this gets us to a very, very interesting question to me. And I've spent more than my fair share of time studying emotion and as it relates to motivation. To what extent do we have control over our emotional lives, our emotional experience? Yeah, maybe we can control the actual display of the emotions, but can we go a step further and not even go there for that emotion? To what extent do we have control over those states? To what extent can we choose or pick our emotions? Right? Let me give you an example. It's not been a good day for taping lectures today. So I started to tape a lecture and I finished one for Personnel Psych, and I went to the camera and it recorded the first 8 seconds and then nothing thereafter. So there's 26 minutes of recording that just didn't get recorded, and I have no reason. My device here is telling me, hey, it's writing to the disk, it's recording, and it's been for this amount of time, but it just didn't, and I have no explanation for it. And I said, well, that really sucks. I could have been angry. It's like, no, I'm more saddened by it. I don't want to be angry about it, right? So then I said, okay, we'll do it over again. So I do it over again. I changed out the batteries on the wireless transmitter and receiver, and I didn't turn the receiver on. So then I recorded a whole entire lecture and a half, only to find out that that little red light wasn't on. So my day started here recording 2.5 lectures that didn't record for whatever reason. And I could be really pissed off about that, but it's like I just kind of resign myself that shit happens. And you know, it's just tough. Because most of the time, you know, there should be a camera person, there should be a sound person, there should be a director, there should be a performer, there should be a script writer. We don't have that luxury. Most of the lectures that are coming to you, video lectures, are done by the instructor by themselves. And it really increases the potential for making mistakes, wasting time. And I've just kind of gotten used to that, you know. It's just the way it is. But what happens is I will get to ultimately spend a more pleasant day just acknowledging that I screwed that shit up. Well, I screwed part of it up. I don't know what the hell else happened otherwise with that first example I gave. I could be really angry. I could throw shit around, but it just isn't going to change things, right? So, emotion management, right? That is, it's not just expression management because I'm here by myself. Well, I got the cats with me, yeah. But it's just, I'm not going to get pissed off about this because it's going to serve no practical purpose. So what did I do? I shifted to a different class. I looked at my stuff and said, well, you got an assignment that's due earlier. I should be doing this lecture anyway. So I'm just going to do something different, and I'm going to go with it. And Cracker and I are going to say goodbye to you. Cracker, my wonderful Cracker, poor Cracker, she passed away from cancer last year. Cracker and I were tight, right? People often ask me, do you have a favorite cat? And I never say that I do. But if I was going to answer that question, it might have been Cracker. So Cracker doing one of her favorite things at the aquarium there. She's going to dig through that aquarium glass and she's going to get one of those fish one of these days. She didn't. So I say goodbye we're done with emotion. You guys, well, you got the homework to do, but we're done with emotion in this section of psychomotivation. If you want to know more about the psychology of emotion, take, what is it, 4515. It's offered now twice a year, so it's offered spring and fall, and I'd love to see you there. Have a great day. I mean it. Have a good day. I'm planning to have a good day. I don't know if you guys know it, and I don't know that today is St. Patrick's Day, so enjoy your St. Patrick's Day. Of course, you won't see this today, so I don't even know why I'm saying that, because this will not get uploaded till tonight, and it won't be posted till tomorrow. But yeah, how many of you feeling burned out? Good. It's natural. We're in very strange circumstances, and we're trying to keep it together and get our shit done, and most of us are doing it in a way that's not familiar to us, so it's natural to feel burned out. So if you feel burned out, hey, I'm sorry. You feel burned out. I feel burned out. We all feel burned out, and we will come through this feeling less burned out. Light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps. So again, have a great day, guys, and I'll talk to you later.